My daughter flies at night. She says it's for business. But each time she leaves, something changes. This morning, her room was empty, and her phone is off. What happened next was more than I could take, so I planned my sweet revenge. Before we continue, thank you so much for your support. Every like, comment, and view means the world to us. We're on a mission to reach our first 1,000 subscribers, and we'd love for you to be part of that journey. If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button and let's grow together. Now, let's proceed. My daughter flies at night. That's how it began. The first time she told me she had to catch a late-night flight for a client in Boston, I didn't think much of it. She's 27, smart, driven, and always had the kind of fire in her that made you believe she'd make it big. After her mother passed, we built a bond that was more like friendship than parenting. I gave her space, freedom, and everything else she asked for, never once doubting her integrity. But then came the second flight. Then the third. And then, slowly, the house began to feel different. Off. Each time she left, I'd notice the smallest changes. A drawer just barely left open, a perfume I didn't recognize lingering faintly on the stairs, or picture frames nudged ever so slightly. It wasn't anything I could put my finger on, but it haunted me. It felt like someone, or something, was passing through my home when she wasn't here, and I was starting to feel like a guest in my own life. I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination. That grief from losing her mother years ago was finally sneaking up on me. That maybe I was just aging, overthinking, slipping. But I'm not a fool. I've spent decades reading people, solving problems, watching faces lie while mouths smiled. My gut has never failed me. So I started keeping track, silently. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, and more importantly, I didn't want her to know I was watching. I kept a journal, marked every date and time she left, the excuse she gave, and how long she was gone. I took pictures of rooms before and after she traveled. At first, the differences were subtle. Then, they weren't. One morning, I walked into her room while she was away on a supposed 2-day trip to Denver. The bed was untouched, not made, but untouched. No dents, no wrinkles. Her nightstand drawer was slightly ajar, and inside, the photo of us she kept beside her bed was missing. Her passport, which I always saw tucked into her desk drawer, was gone, and her phone? Powered off. I tried calling. Straight to voicemail. Texts unread. Her social media pages were suddenly quiet. No posts, no stories, no trace of her location. It didn't make sense. And for the first time since her mother's death, I felt something sharp slice through my chest, fear. I wasn't just losing her. I had already lost her. That same day, I found a receipt in the trash, one I wasn't supposed to see. A payment for a short-term apartment rental in a city just an hour away. Not Denver. Not Boston. Somewhere she had never once mentioned. I stared at the address on the receipt for what felt like an eternity. I told myself to breathe, to be calm, to not assume the worst. But I knew what I was seeing. She wasn't traveling for business. She wasn't traveling at all. She was sneaking away into a different life, and I was left behind, blind, trusting, and irrelevant. Still, I didn't panic. Not outwardly. I called an old contact from my corporate days, someone who owed me a favor. Within hours, I had surveillance footage from the building tied to the address on that receipt. And there she was, my daughter, entering the apartment late at night, dressed in casual clothes. Not business attire. No laptop bag. No urgency. She was relaxed, comfortable. And she wasn't alone. A man followed behind her. Tall, well-dressed. He put his hand on the small of her back, and she laughed. The same laugh her mother used to have. I replayed the clip again and again. Each time, a part of me broke. This wasn't work. This wasn't even casual dating. This was a routine, a life, one I knew nothing about. My daughter, the same one who cried on my shoulder the day she lost her first job, was now capable of building an entire world behind my back. That night, I sat in the living room, staring at the blank television screen. I didn't even notice I hadn't eaten. I just kept thinking about the perfume, the missing pictures, the strange nights, the drawer that didn't close the way it used to. All the signs I ignored because I wanted to believe she was still the little girl who once made me pancakes for Father's Day and called them dad cakes. But she wasn't that little girl anymore. She was something else now, something calculated. And then came the moment that truly shattered me. While looking through some old photo albums, I found a letter. It had fallen behind the bookshelf, likely during one of my rearrangement fits. It was addressed to my daughter, but the handwriting wasn't hers. It was her mother's. The date was recent, far too recent. The message was short but clear. If he ever finds out, we'll lose everything. Don't let him see who you've become. You know what we planned. My hands went cold. My throat tightened. My wife was dead. Buried. Cremated, actually. And yet this handwriting, this letter, it was her. Without a doubt, I had loved that woman deeply, and I knew every stroke of her pen. But if she was truly gone, then how was this letter written just months ago? And how did my daughter have it? Suddenly, I wasn't dealing with just lies and deception. I was dealing with something bigger. A betrayal years in the making. A twisted dance between memory and manipulation. Between the woman I buried and the daughter I thought I raised. And for the first time in my life, I wasn't sad anymore. I was angry. The kind of anger that doesn't scream or curse. The kind that sharpens. The kind that waits. The kind that plots. She thought she could fly at night and vanish into lies. But I was about to show her that when you betray a father who gave you everything, you don't just lose his trust. You lose everything. I left home just after noon the next day with the receipt in my coat pocket and my thoughts as loud as thunder. The address pointed to a quiet street in a neighboring city. A place she'd never mentioned once in all her so-called travel stories. As I drove, I couldn't stop thinking about that letter. My late wife's handwriting. My daughter's secret apartment. Their hidden connection. My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter the closer I got. I had questions, and every mile I covered only made the weight of those questions heavier. My daughter was living a life I had no part in, and that thought alone was more painful than anything I'd faced in years. The building itself was unassuming. 3 stories, beige walls, white balconies, the kind of place where people walk their dogs in slippers and keep their blinds halfway drawn. I parked 3 spaces down and sat in the car for nearly 40 minutes, watching, observing. A few people came and went. Then, around 2:15 p.m., she stepped out. My daughter, dressed differently, no makeup, baggy sweater, sunglasses. She didn't look like someone running a business meeting. She looked like someone hiding in plain sight. And when she locked the door behind her, she didn't use a keychain I'd seen before. This was a different person. A different life. I waited until she was gone. Then I got out of the car and walked toward the front office, pretending to look for a friend. I asked casually about Unit 306, mentioning I might have gotten the wrong address for a client meeting. The woman behind the desk smiled, pulled up her screen, and said, "Oh, that's rented by Evelyn Marcus." I froze. Evelyn Marcus. My wife's maiden name. That name hadn't come up in over a decade. The receptionist kept talking, but I didn't hear a word. My daughter was living under her mother's name. Not mine. Not her own. Her mother's. The same woman I had buried with my own hands. I thanked the woman and stepped back into the sun, lightheaded. Everything was spinning now. I walked back to my car, trying to calm myself, but the puzzle pieces were no longer scattered. They were beginning to form a picture I couldn't unsee. She hadn't just lied about where she went. She had stolen an identity, one she knew would open doors. My wife had assets in her name, closed accounts, unclaimed bonds, properties only a few people knew about, my daughter being one of them. But why impersonate her? Why now? That night, I returned to the building. I waited until the lights in Unit 306 turned off and the world outside settled into silence. I approached the back balcony. Years ago, I taught my daughter how to open a stubborn lock with a card and patience. It took me less than a minute to get inside. The scent hit me first, lavender and rosewood, the same fragrance my wife used to wear. It wasn't a coincidence. Nothing here was. The place was immaculate, curated like a showroom. On the walls were photos, some real, some edited. I recognized the original versions. Our family photos, cropped to remove me, replaced with someone else. A man I didn't recognize. I moved carefully through each room. The kitchen held 2 wine glasses in the sink. A calendar on the fridge had dates marked with symbols, some flights, some bank appointments. One simply marked transfer. I opened her drawer in the bedroom and found jewelry, pieces that had once belonged to her mother, pieces I thought were gone or buried. And then, tucked beneath a folder of papers, I found a passport. The face was hers, but the name? Evelyn Marcus, my late wife. I flipped to the back and saw stamps, transactions, even a fake marriage license with the man from the photos. I sank into the edge of the bed, trying to process it all. My daughter had erased me from the story. She had created a version of her mother, a woman who wasn't dead, just renamed, reimagined, repurposed. And she had stepped into that role like it was a coat. She was using it to move money, forge connections, and build a new life from the ashes of an old one. I felt like I was suffocating. How long had she been planning this? Was her mother really dead? Or had they been plotting this long before the funeral? I opened her laptop. Thankfully, she hadn't logged out. Dozens of emails under her alias, Evelyn Marcus. Messages to lawyers. Inquiries about property deeds. Transfer requests to offshore accounts. She had positioned herself as the legal heir to assets that were never supposed to resurface. My wife had set up dormant trusts for emergencies. Trust my daughter was now draining using a name that no longer belonged to anyone alive. It wasn't fraud in the obvious sense. It was something worse, calculated identity theft from a grave. My trust wasn't broken. It was obliterated. I left the apartment before sunrise, my mind racing, my heart a hammer inside my chest. I went home and pulled out my old briefcase. Inside were the tools I had promised myself I'd never need again. Contacts from my auditing days, asset verification services, and legal friends who owed me favors. I called them all. In less than 24 hours, I knew every account she had touched, every transaction made under the name Evelyn Marcus. She thought she had erased me. But now, I had a trail. And she was going to learn what happens when a father who gave you everything decides to take it all back. My daughter didn't just lie. She rebuilt my dead wife and wore her face like a costume. And now, she was about to be unmasked. I didn't call her. I didn't confront her. I didn't scream, cry, or demand an explanation. Because by now, I knew better. This wasn't a phase. This wasn't rebellion. My daughter hadn't made a mistake. She had made a choice. A slow, deliberate one. She had built her second life carefully, down to the perfume that matched her mother's. She had erased me from photos and from memory, recreated my late wife's identity, and maneuvered through the world like I didn't exist. She thought I would never notice. She thought I would go quietly. But instead, I began my own quiet war. And my first weapon was silence. I called an old colleague from my corporate days, a forensic accountant who specialized in legal reversals. I gave him a name. Evelyn Marcus. I handed him every detail I had uncovered, the fake marriage license, the property transfers, the offshore inquiries. Within days, he traced the funds and confirmed what I feared. My daughter had gained access to 3 dormant inheritance accounts and 1 real estate title under her mother's name. She had forged enough documents to pass light scrutiny, but not deep legal review. The moment I triggered a compliance request through the bank's internal systems, everything froze. Every penny, every deed, every shell account. And she had no idea it was me. I then contacted a lawyer, someone I had worked with years ago during a multi-state audit case. She was ruthless, brilliant, and discreet. I told her everything. Gave her power of attorney over the estates tied to my wife. We filed for identity reclamation and launched an investigation into the forged transfers. By the time my daughter noticed her funds were locked, she was already under audit. But I didn't stop there. I also filed a quiet petition to amend my own will. I made sure every future asset, every inheritance, and every legal claim she could have made vanished overnight. Not to a rival, not to a stranger, but to a foundation created in my wife's name. A real one. For children who'd lost both parents, something I now understood too well. But what I did next was what truly ended everything. I wrote her a letter, not out of emotion, but out of clarity. I told her I knew everything. I detailed what I had seen, what I had learned, and what I had done. I included photographs from the apartment, screenshots of her emails, copies of the passport, the legal filings, the banking freezes. And at the end, I wrote one final line. You could have had everything by being honest, but now you have to live with nothing but your lies. I sealed the envelope, sent it by courier to the apartment, and waited. She didn't come home that night, or the next. On the third day, my doorbell rang at dusk. It was her. Her face was pale, her eyes darker than I remembered. She didn't speak at first, just stood there, the letter in her hand, trembling. Then she said, barely above a whisper, "You planned this." I looked her in the eyes, and for the first time in years, I didn't see my little girl. I saw a stranger. "No," I said calmly. "You did." I just responded. She stepped forward, pleading now. Told me she only wanted to protect what was ours. That she didn't know how to grieve her mother. That she thought stepping into her shoes would bring peace. I almost laughed. Peace. She hadn't brought peace. She'd brought betrayal. She'd turned her mother's memory into currency and tried to erase the man who gave her everything. Her tears didn't move me. Not this time. Because you don't get to mourn the house you burned down. I never wanted to hurt you, she said, voice breaking. But you did, I replied. And now, everything is locked. Everything is gone, and it's never coming back. She fell silent, as if realizing she wasn't going to be forgiven. Not this time. Then she asked the question I was waiting for. Why didn't you come to me first? Why didn't you ask me about it before doing all this? I smiled, the kind of smile that says more than words ever could. Because I did, I whispered. Every time you flew at night, I asked. You lied. Every time I gave you a chance to be honest, you hid. So now, I'm simply answering you in the only language you seem to understand, consequences. She left after that. No hug, no apology, just the sound of her footsteps fading into the dark. But that wasn't the end. A week later, I received a letter from the Financial Fraud Division. The investigation I initiated had expanded. Turns out, my daughter had impersonated not just her mother, but me, too. Small things. Tax adjustments. Forgotten stock accounts. Enough to trigger federal interest. I didn't press charges. I didn't have to. Life had already handed her the sentence. Isolation, disgrace, and the echo of a father's silence. Now, I sit alone in this house. The air is quieter, but not empty. The rooms no longer shift when she's gone. There are no drawers left ajar. No perfume lingers in the hallway. Everything is where it belongs. Because I took it all back. And I have no regrets. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and help us reach our first 1,000 subscribers. Your support means the world to us.